Voices,
the things they said,
voices,
some from those dead,
all the voices heard. Voices,
things we say,
voices,
they're in your head,
all
the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Shannon.
And no Flo today, no Skylar today. Just two hosts having a time with a very special guest. We are here with Rose Disney. Rose, how are you doing?
All right, thank you.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to having you on today because you're going to be discussing with us a very important story that I think folks really need to know about, not just in the Sacramento region, but throughout the state. And this is the story of what happened to your daughter in an interaction with police and with the carceral system, the jails, in March of 2020, and how what ensued led to her passing in April of this year. So just to begin, thank you so much for coming on and for talking with us about what's obviously just a very difficult topic.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
So Shannon, why don't you just start us off? You know, Rose is kind of your guest. You plan this whole thing out. So I'm just gonna cede the floor.
Cool. Okay. Well, yeah. Again, I think in communication with Rose as we were getting ready for this show, one of the things I'll just echo from all of that is I think just gratitude for trusting us with this story, because it's big and it's so close to you and involves obviously someone that you love very much, your daughter Maya. So what happened in March of 2020 is that Maya was involved in a car accident. It was a 2-vehicle collision, minor injuries. There at the time, she was then arrested because she did not pass a field sobriety test. And then we get into these, issues with the cops not paying attention to signs and signals that Maya needed some further support. She was then jailed, and then pretrial and, arraignment, pretrial, all of that happens. And really what we end up with here is we see all of these inequities that exist, which led to Maya's death. And so, as we read the two pieces in the Vanguard, one was just like a story of what happened the night of the accident, and the other was your response to the Vanguard. I was struck by who was Maya? Like, you end your story with this really incredible little paragraph about who she was and what she loved and what she could have been. And I'm interested if you just share with us about who Maya was, who she was to you, who she was to her community. Yeah.
Okay. I had Maya when I was young. I was 23 when she was born, and I was by myself. So I raised her by myself. So in a lot of ways, she and I grew up together, and we learned a lot from each other in that way. She was around adults a lot, so I guess maybe that's why, but she was really able to engage with people, and it's like she meant something important to every person that she met. She made everybody feel important. It was important to her that she listened to you. She cared about fairness to a fault, and she just could never accept that life just isn't fair sometimes. She really had a big heart for animals. her first love was horses. So from, as a kid, she volunteered with a program that rehabbed rescue horses, and she did volunteer work to help with foster youth in our community, and she always gave up some of her Christmas gifts to donate to foster kids at Christmas time. And she was concerned, she was a deep thinker. She was deeply concerned with social justice and with all of the wrong that she saw going on around her. And I don't think she was ever able to sit with that peacefully. And, on a lighter note, she loved to cook. She loved to garden. And, whenever she would make a really good plate of food, she would call me and be like, "Mom, do you want me to bring you a plate of food? Like, I made a really good dinner." But as soon as she did something great, the first thing she would want to do is to share it with somebody else. Yeah. And I think, she struggled for a long time with learning disabilities. She struggled in school. And when she got into high school, that was where she kind of learned to not have blind faith in authority. And I would say the education system failed her.
Yeah.
She was able to make it out of high school, but barely. And she always worked. So she moved out of my house when she graduated high school, and then just, to her own place, just a few blocks away, really, and where she eventually died. But
can we talk about, you mentioned her struggles. Can we talk a little bit about her struggles with mental health? She died by suicide on her 20th birthday of this year. It sounds like, the way you talk about it, as a direct result of systemic failures and systemic oppression. Can you talk us through her history of mental health?
Yes. She was first assessed for learning disabilities in 5th or 6th grade. She moved on to start being medicated for ADHD in junior high school. In high school, when she was around age 14, was when I started seeing a real shift in her. She started developing what seemed like a mood or personality disorder even. She checked a lot of boxes for borderline personality disorder. She was very depressed. And she was under the care of the same psychiatrist since 7th grade. And so she saw him until she turned 18, when she was like, "I'm 18 now. I don't have to see a doctor anymore, and I'm not going back." Eventually, when she was 19, she did reach back out to him and start seeing him again after the accident, though. When she realized that she needed help with her issues. She had she had a lot of patience. She was a very calm, easygoing person, but when she got mad, it was hard for her to temper that. She would rage and act out, and it became scary or violent at times. I didn't know really what to call it or how to look at it. I tried to talk with her doctor about it, but again, she was very intuitive and very smart and very good at engaging people. And she would just tell the doctor, "I don't know what she's talking about," and so she was never able to receive treatment for that aspect, this rage switch that would flip. She also struggled with auditory processing, which meant that she didn't hear most of the things that were said to her. And what she did hear, she remembered very little because her retention was very low. And so it was just all of these sort of misfires in her brain that frustrated her and then would lead to these periodic snaps. She and I would refer to them as incidents. So there would be a buildup, and then she would just blow it. And she would, I mean, inevitably she would crash a car, or she would break something, or there would be something that would have to be cleaned up afterwards. And
Yeah. Well,
So let's.
context.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. So I think. So you're talking a lot about these things that are ringing in terms of the story surrounding what happened the night of the accident in Citrus Heights. So that happened in March of 2020, March 20th, 2020. And that was Maya and another vehicle were involved. I'm interested in how, like, you talk about these like blow ups that happen, and we see that sort of, that happens in the story here. So the night of the accident, she ends up driving on the wrong side of the road and hits a vehicle, and police are called on the scene, at which point we sort of see like what you talk about as an incident, right, where she becomes angry and obviously like frustrated, and there's a lot of emotions are high in that space.
And you were on the scene, right?
I was. The accident was it was actually in Carmichael, pretty close to her house, close to my house. It was close. And so she called me when it happened. And she said, "Mom, come down here." And she gave me the intersection. I just had an accident. And she was frantic. The police are on their way. Please come down here. And I said, "Have you been drinking?" And she was like, "Please just come down here." And I said, "Maya, have you been drinking?" And she started crying. She said, "Mom, I promise I'm going to be better. I'm going to do better. I promise I'm going to do better, Mom. Like, just come down here." And I was like, oh, shit, So I drove down there, and I think that Maya thought that she wasn't, like, I would always tell her that she was going to be arrested if she continued to be like drinking and driving around, like, even if she had a little bit of alcohol on her breath. She never believed me. She always thought that I was just exaggerating. And so she also thought that she thought that I was Superwoman. I don't know what she thought, but she thought that if I were on scene, that she wouldn't get arrested. So I got up right as she was getting arrested, and she was like, "No, wait, just wait a minute. Like, my mom's on her way. She's almost here. Like, just wait a minute. Don't arrest me yet." But then he did. And when I approached the car at that point, and yeah, so I was on the scene, and when I approached the car, she did start crying. She broke down, and she started escalating, and I could tell that she was going to snap. I know her.
She was going to have an episode.
Yes.
Yeah. So like a mental health crisis, effectively.
Well, yeah. And I told the police officer, "My daughter has untreated mental illness. She is going to snap. She's going to have an incident. She's going," and I told him, we call them episodes or incidents, where she's going to get irrationally upset, and she is going to flail around, and you have to react calmly, or this is going to go way worse than it needs to go. And then I said, "Can I come to the hospital with her just to be there?" And he said no. And he said, basically, just to go home and let them do their job. I didn't see any alternative to doing that, so I did. And then
this story so far, and since Shannon's running the plot line, I get to be the commentary guy this time. Like, this strikes me as the beginning of this story. So many youths, so many 19-year-olds make these bad decisions, do something like this, have interactions with the law. I mean, where I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so many people, not just young people, but people drink and drive and end up in these situations that, you know, can be detrimental and dangerous and all these things. But so far, this story, it follows a plot line that we've seen just generally in all sorts of, you know, it happens every day. I think the part you're discussing right now, this mental health aspect, is really where this starts to bring a larger problem into focus. And also, your daughter was Black, right?
Yes.
And I think we always have to ask ourselves, what does this mean in a situation when you're dealing with law enforcement in a country with the history that it has?
Spot on. Yeah, in fact, Maya's story, this whole story is unremarkable in a lot of ways, which is sad. And I probably never would have even thought to talk to anyone about it had I not read that article in the Davis Vanguard. And I was like, no, that's not okay. That's not right. You know, she's dead now. And I read it after she had died, and I felt very defensive, and I just felt like, no, it's not a remarkable story, and shame on us that it's not a remarkable story.
Well, let's get to that Davis Vanguard story. So what happens that night, the night of the accident, from where you left off, is you have now alerted the officer, the arresting officer, whose name is Greg White, that Maya has untreated mental health symptoms, not only, or untreated mental health diagnoses. And not only have you alerted him of that, but you've also alerted him of the signs and signals that an episode is about to, it's going to happen, and this is what it looks like. So he is now equipped with insider, like, family knowledge about what could happen. And exactly what you say is going to happen does end up happening while Maya is at the hospital getting checked for pre-booking for clearance for, you know, entry to the jail. So as far as we know from the story, once she, like, you know, she gets arrested, and that sort of begins to this, like, domino effect of, like, her mental health episode that just, like, begins to escalate. When she's in the hospital, she then is, like, doing the kicking and screaming and flailing. She's angry, all things that you said were going to happen because you know her, because you've seen her in the midst of episodes. She bangs her head up against a picture frame that then breaks. And while she's exhibiting all of these behaviors, she is still cleared for booking at the jail.
And not only that, on
And
the way there, oh no, that was on the way to jail. Sorry.
on the
In
way
which
to, right,
the cop claimed that he spit on her, right?
she spit on him.
Or yeah, I'm sorry. And, you know, in the piece that you wrote, you said the first thing she said to you was, get that footage, because that's
Yep.
a lie. He's going to, you know, he's going to try and say that I did
Right.
this thing that I didn't do.
Yeah, and
So-
she said, Mom, I saw him turn the camera off. Like, he did something to the camera. He did something to the camera. And sure enough, when they finally gave my lawyer the footage, they said, oh, the camera must have died. And according to people that I've spoken to that know about that stuff, that doesn't happen. It's connected to the car battery. It's not, the battery to the camera doesn't die.
Right.
It's turned on manually, and it's turned off manually by the officer, for the CHP at least.
So yeah, are we missing anything here? So we're seeing here this California Highway Patrolman lying, right? Doctoring footage effectively. We're seeing Dr. Hal, Jakle, I don't know how to pronounce that, and nurse Lisa Jacobs at Mercy San Juan clearing this woman, this young person who's clearly going through a crisis to go straight to jail. Are we missing anything there?
No, I would add also that I've asked myself many times, and I would love to ask CHP Officer Greg White, why, if she was being dragged, kicking and screaming profanities at him through the parking lot of Mercy San Juan to his car, and he felt threatened by her, and he knew that she was acting violently toward him, why would he have not activated his in-car camera? That's one question that I have. I think that doesn't make sense. Nothing that he said makes sense. And also in the hospital, when she was flailing around on the floor, I thought it was really so sad that she was just asking to call her mom. That was all she was asking to do, was to call me. And she just didn't understand that as an adult, they're not going to do that. You know, she also struggled with executive function for her whole life. And so a lot of the realities of adult life had not set in for her yet, which for most 19-year-olds, they don't, at 19. But for her in particular, she just, it's sad to me that, like, if I had been able to be there, or if they would have recognized a crisis for what it was, or just recognized it for what I said it was going to be, it could have gone differently.
So Maya ends up released by the hospital for booking into the jail, at which point she spends a couple of weeks.
March 30th, 2020. So it's beginning of COVID, right?
Beginning of COVID. And this is,
Yeah.
So she's incarcerated for a couple of weeks before arraignment.
Yeah, I mean, she's detained for 2 weeks. I mean,
Okay.
almost 2 full weeks. She was not even, like, no pretrial interview, no judge, no lawyer, no arraignment, no nothing. Total violation of her due process rights.
That is a
Gone.
habeas corpus, like, immediate violation. That I don't
Right.
even understand how that's just not thrown out the second that this happens.
Agreed. Apparently, the emergency declaration completely suspends our constitutional rights, and I think that's something that's important for us to know.
So in this process, you talk about, or not in this process, during that 2-week time, Maya's experience in the jail, we can only imagine, is not, fine dining and relaxation. So what was that? I mean, in terms of, like, the conversations you were able to have with her during and once she was released, what was it like for her in jail as a 19-year-old woman who
Right.
had just been completely screwed by the system?
Well, Maya, I don't know. I wasn't surprised to learn this, but when she got in, she was disgusted by how dirty it was. And so she used her towel to wipe down her whole cell, A, thinking she was going to leave the next day, and B, not knowing that you don't get another towel for a week. And so she learned that tough lesson. And so at the end of that several-day period, when she hadn't had a shower, they shipped her to the branch. And when she got off the bus there, the first thing one of the women said to her is, like, "You stink." And they just started messing with her over that. And then 3
Fellow
women,
inmate,
huh?
or was it a guard or an inmate?
Inmates. Oh yeah, inmates. And then 3 women started a fight with her over the TV, and she said that they went to the bathroom and to fight, and that she really did not have a choice other than to just fight with them. And then after the fight, that they had found out she was only 18, and she felt really bad, and they felt really bad, and they ended up looking out for her for that second week, I guess, like giving her their little snacks. It sounded awful. She said that the guards don't look out for you. The guards harass you. And she just said that the women in that room, it's like a big room, like a big what would you call it? Not a dorm, but like a place where you play basketball, like at high school, like a
Like a rec
gym or
area.
The gym, yeah. And they're
like
just
a
bunks,
yeah.
bunk beds, yeah.
And she said they're supposed to watch you, but they don't.
Sacramento County jails are notorious for being among the worst run in the
Horrible.
country, and our country's jails are known to be among the worst run in the world. So yeah, that must have been a fairly traumatic few weeks.
Yeah, and she was terrified of going back.
And it
Terrified.
was, again, this is at the beginning of the pandemic, when like not only is this like her it's a wild and terrible experience in the jail, but on top of that you have this like global crisis happening, so everything is different, right? So she comes out of jail 2 weeks in, and what is she like after that experience?
I did not know to what extent she was so anguished. That was one thing. Like, I saw her a lot of times each week because I drove her everywhere. So I drove her to work. I drove her because we thought that her license had been suspended. We didn't find out until a year later that there was some administrative oversight and that the DMV had never suspended her license. And so that was going to be another hang up in her conviction, that she was likely going to have to not have a license for even longer. But she was lonely, I think, and she didn't have a car, so she didn't have a way to get around, and she lived with a couple, and I think she just felt very alone. She felt really sad and alone, and I didn't realize that.
This hit her right when COVID started too, right? I mean, this whole thing begins at the onset of this very kind of this moment of collective trauma,
right,
that's just compounded on top of what she's going through.
Right. Her arrest, I believe, was the day after the emergency declaration, something like that.
Yeah, and she you mentioned earlier that after all of this, she did realize the need for more support and reached out for mental health support from an old psychiatrist that had seen her since she was a child or a much younger person. So it's not as if Maya was living in a space where she didn't sort of realize the impact of what all of this had on her. I think like that's what that says to me anyway.
Right.
And how long did you all have to wait between her release from the jail and like taking us up to the Vanguard the Davis Vanguard piece that was written about that preliminary trial? What date was that? That was unclear to me on all the documents that we received.
Her preliminary hearing was in March of 2021.
A full year.
It was a year.
A whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
She did have an arraignment hearing eventually, a couple months maybe afterwards. I know we had already retained an attorney, and then it was just continued. There were a lot of continuances requested just based on evidence being outstanding still and all of that.
It's hard for me to believe, like, after the trauma of being held in jail for weeks against, all Sixth Amendment, everything that states, and the trauma that comes with that, then you have to wait a full year as somebody who is struggling with mental health in a country that does not provide affordable mental health services to really anyone. And then on top of that, you have this hanging over your head with a district attorney ready to throw the book at you for a year, while also going through the trauma of the COVID era, right? It just seems to me like this really unnecessarily compounds and compounds and compounds here.
It was incredibly stressful for her. All of her hair fell out over the course of that year. And Maya had alopecia. She was diagnosed when she was a little kid, and her hair all fell out. She didn't have hair until probably ninth grade. It grew back. And then it was, she had most of her hair for until this happened. And stress is a big trigger for a lot of autoimmune conditions, really. And yeah, all of her hair fell out, and that just added to everything for her. And she would try to research like support. What about like going to jail with alopecia? She was like, I only found one article or one thing, and it was about this woman who killed herself because she didn't want to go to jail with alopecia. And I was just like, Maya, like, it's going to be okay. Like, you're going to be okay. But I didn't believe that.
Yeah.
She said, Mom, you don't know how mean they're in jail. They're so mean, and nobody looks out for you. They're going to starve me. They're going to beat me up. And she was just so tormented about all of it. For every time a court date would come up, she would be stressed. And yeah, she hated that it took so long. And a couple of times she tried to just pull the plug, just give me whatever they want to give me and have it be over with. But what they wanted was ridiculous. So
yeah, and it sounds like in this Vanguard piece, there were all of these like additional charges that were added to the original, like going back to the start of all of this, right? We're talking about a DUI collision with minor injuries. The other vehicle was driven by a guy who had, at the time of the accident, a hand laceration and reported pain in his head, neck, and chest. And I'm not a doctor, but I have been in a couple of car accidents, and that's what happens. And he walks away. But on top of that, it's like she's also getting charged with resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. And that charge is even worse because it's during COVID-19 that she allegedly spits on this officer, respiratory droplets, all of that. So in the Davis Vanguard piece, there's a lot that is shared about the Deputy District Attorney Emily Divinia Gracia, who I think in particular at the end really it drives home the point that we've made a couple of times, but the defense attorney, Byron, is it Roop or Rope? Roop. So he says, accident could have been worse, and all of this, so much of this stems from mental health, and he's trying to reduce these charges for her. And the deputy district attorney is like, no, 100%, this is a felony offense. There's other people in the car. She put the victim's life in danger, and there's no evidence of mental health being an issue here. And the defendant, Maya, was very intoxicated and angry, and they got caught. And so that's why this happened. It's this classic painting of the angry Black woman, that on top of the DUI, right? So what was that like after this whole thing happens? what does that do? Because Maya then realizes, like, this just got even worse, right?
During the hearing, the look on her face was just humiliation and defeat. Like, as soon as the woman said, she basically objected to even discussing mental health. There's no evidence of mental health playing any part in this. And Maya just looked down and, because she was a really private person. And so for them to all of it to just be dragged out like this and then be shot down publicly was really hard for her.
Can I ask you to, like, yeah, I mean, all of this, it's infuriating because what happened in the courtroom sounds like what happens every day in a trial courtroom, where it's like, they claim to be a system of rehabilitation, but it is anything but. It is all carceral. It is all punitive. And there's nothing about trying to rehabilitate people, try to, help them with any sort of mental health issues they have, perhaps any addiction issues they have, anything like that. How can we get you back on track? It is all punitive. I think about that too when I read that original piece in the Davis Vanguard. And as a journalist, I'm very interested to hear from both you, both Rose and Shannon. How did that piece strike you? Because when I read it, I mean, it's written by a student, by the way, a college student. But at the end of the day, it's written not very far off from what your average straight news story of a court hearing like this will read in a SAC B, in a San Francisco Chronicle. So I'm curious kind of what your responses are when you read a piece like that, within this context and given what we know about Maya.
I can respond to that. When I first read the article, that was how it read to me too. Like, this is a kid that wrote this, and it sounded to me like it's probably in my imagination, it would be like if there's a journalism teacher or a professor who's giving an assignment, there are these public hearings that you can watch on YouTube, pick one and make an article about it. That was how it read to me. I don't know that that's why or how it was written. It's such a non-newsworthy story on its face, especially. And so that was just how it read to me. But I didn't care for the fact that it made Maya look so bad and made the cop look so good. And it didn't tell both sides of the story. It was very one-sided and critical.
Yeah, I think, when I read this story after I read, Rose, your response to it. So reading this was like, this is obviously, there's a very particular story that is trying to be told here, and it is one that upholds the propaganda machine and like that the carceral system and the justice system is just like working, doing the good work, right? There's no personalization of anything here. It's except for the officer, the deputy district attorney. Like, Maya is not made to be a person who like contains multitudes and lives with this mental health, and there's so many gaps in this story. We don't get to hear from the beginning to the end. And I think there's a way to tell this story more robustly for what they're attempting to do here. It just really felt like, when I read it, I was like, this just makes Maya out to be a terrible person. Like, and I didn't know her, but I can just like see this like picture of her in the Vanguard that was posted with your letter, like sitting on her bed with the dog. And I'm like, I don't see this person that this story is telling. Like, it just doesn't match up to me. So what's the deal?
And that's what concerns me is, and we talk about this a lot on the show, but it bears repeating every time that the sheriff's departments and police departments all throughout the country have very, very robust PR arms. And they are churning out things like this every day, person caught for allegedly doing this, doing that. And then all of these news outlets, your TV stations, radio stations, newspapers that have to feed the beast, will just turn around stories like that. They will never, ever reach out to a defendant when something initially happens. So how many Mayas every day are getting this treatment throughout this country? And it's really, it's just really frustrating to me. And like,
Yeah.
there's a part of me, and like, I'll say like, Davis Vanguard actually has some folks that are trying to reform elements of the carceral system. So I was actually kind of surprised reading what I read there. But at the same time, what this student wrote, it's like, this is what you write in news writing 101. Like, this is what you're taught to write as somebody who went to grad school for this. And it just shows you structurally on my side, right, in the news industry, how this perpetuates this whole problem, this whole system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other part of that piece that comes to mind is like the problematic perpetuation that you're talking about, Kempa. And then like I'm thinking about people, right? Like Rose, the story ends very tragically because on Maya's 20th birthday, she dies by suicide. And you then find this story that was written about your daughter, and you can't even find her in that, right? Like in that story that she's like allegedly this person that, the cop is talking about. But you respond to it because Maya, because also it like lights you up inside. I'm sure that like your daughter is not here anymore, and so you respond to them, to the Vanguard, with it's a lengthy but great letter telling them where to go and how to get there, and also about Maya, about who Maya was and about how she struggled. What has one, I guess, like, how was that experience for you? What has been the response to that? Have you had much of a response? And
Not really.
okay.
Not from people other than friends or her friends. People have generally been supportive, and that's just in general. I have received a lot of love and support throughout this whole thing. But in response to the Davis Vanguard piece, not really anyone reaching out besides you guys. Thank you. I think a lot of that has to do with, like I said, it is an unremarkable story. Like, Maya was not perfect. Maya did probably mouth off to the police. She did have a tantrum. She was mad that she got arrested. And I have a bigger issue here. My bigger issue is that this society treats people, humans, women, like Maya, like they are disposable. When I found her body at her house and we called the police, and the police, what he was saying to me, he said, has she tried this before? And I said, no. And he said, well, are you surprised that she did it? And I said, yeah. And then he said, well, has she ever talked about it before? And I said, sure, yes. And he's like, okay, well, we need to look through the house now. Just based on that, apparently, there was no investigation. They didn't even talk to her roommates. They didn't interview them at all. They didn't do a toxicology screen. The coroner's office won't even return my calls. Maya was a disposable human. And just from beginning to end, from the day she was born until the day she died, that is how this world treated her. And she's not alone. It's worth noting that her story is not remarkable. It's not sensational. It's not unusual. And I think that's why nobody's really reached out, is like, well, okay, like, yeah, that happened, but of course that happened. It's maddening.
When it's one person, it's a tragedy, but when it's 500, it's a statistic, right? And this happens every day.
Yeah.
On Saturday here in the county jail, a man in his early 30s died while, we're not sure of the details, but we do know that the sheriff's department, the guards there were warned that he was coming off of heroin use and that his breathing goes very shallow when that happens, and to have him in the medical space while he comes off of that. And the guard said, yeah, sure. They threw him into general population. He dies, right? How often does this happen? And to people who, like, we have to recalibrate, right? We have to rethink this, because
Right.
any one of these folks could be us or someone we know and love. And I think, yeah, I mean, I can't say it better than you did, Rose, but like, we have to recalibrate how we do this and see humanity and ourselves in everyone who goes through stuff like this.
Yeah, there's something about this, like, that this story that, as Rose says, how it's not sensational, it's not remarkable, and that, I think that, like, there's so much importance in that. And as I think about Maya, what keeps coming back to me is, this is a young woman who was radiant in so many ways based on all accounts. And she struggled. She made bad choices. We all do, right? But there was something more, because she lived with this mental health, carrying, like, this, like, burden of mental health that she could not get to the bottom of. And then a carceral system that looks at her as a Black woman as less than, she ends up there, and she can't see a way out. And we'll never know what Maya was actually thinking when she, died by suicide. But based on everything that you're sharing, the inability to see her way out, because there were no tools, there was no support, had to have played a role in all of this.
Right.
And that is so incredibly tragic. Like,
I agree. There's so many disappointments in her life, like so many teachers just every system, the educational system failed her. Teachers told her horrible things about herself. She was, inappropriately searched on campus by a cop who threatened to break her phone if she tried to call me. She was failed by the healthcare system. She reached out many times to therapists over the past year. She asked me, to help connect her with a therapist, and I was trying to help her do that in a way that would foster independence and not just relying on me to do it for her. I was trying to coach her through that. She even paid cash for like a phone, like on Facebook when you can add for therapists. She called one and she paid $150 for him to tell her, don't call me or any other therapist until you have quit drinking and gone to rehab for 90 days. And
what kind of, I'm sorry.
Awful. I know. It's crazy. So she calls me and she's like, Mom, I need to go to rehab for 90 days. I'm like, my ass, like, you're not going to rehab for 90 days. So she reached out to me and I was like, no, I'm not sending you away for 3 months. Like, here. So we looked up AA meetings together. Different alternatives. I said, if you can attend an AA meeting on Zoom every day for 30 days and you feel that it is still not meeting your needs, then we can discuss a rehab program. I don't think I knew how much she was drinking.
Sure.
But I don't really know whether or not that would have made a difference in my decision. But she did reach out. She reached out to so many people.
Yeah.
And it just, nobody showed up for her, which sucks because she showed up for people. She was a hard worker. She always had a job since she was like 14. She was a great employee. There were hundreds of people at her memorial. Like, I was stunned by that. Just people from preschool teachers, her elementary school principal, old neighbors, old classmates, coworkers from all the jobs she'd ever had, just people who she touched so many people and she showed up for so many people and nobody showed up for her. And it just became too much for her to carry, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. As we were like nearing the end of the show, I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to have said everything you wanted to say about this, about Maya, about the story, about who she was, any last things. And I'm glad you brought up her memorial, because we like to often end with something that is, this is not a story that we can flip around and make sound bright and shiny and beautiful, but we can say that Maya was bright and shiny and beautiful and attracted community, and you sharing that, all of those folks showing up because of her, is a really, I think, lovely image. So, but aside from that, if there's anything else that you want people to know, this is your time.
The only other thing I would say is that if somebody is having thoughts of suicide, or if you fear that someone is having thoughts of suicide, that there is a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline Network, and where they have local representatives to talk to anyone on the phone at any time.
Yeah. Kempa, you any last question, thoughts?
I mean, yeah. The two things that in my head, I think that someone listening to this would want to know, kind of, one, let's start with this. what is something that someone as a community member who wants to help make a difference in this space, and like, this is a tough one, right? Because this is a story that shows so many damn failures at every step of the way.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe this isn't an episode where we point folks in a direction like that, who want to help, but like, or we point them in all the directions to help defeat this racist carceral system that doesn't work for people, that doesn't provide mental health services, but instead is punitive by nature, by rote. My question, sorry, Rose, is where would you point folks who want to help?
I have had friends and family and others who have volunteered to write letters directly to CHP officer Greg White, Emily DeVinagracio with the district attorney's office,
Mm-hmm.
and Dr. Hal Jackal and Lisa Jacobs RN at Mercy San Juan Hospital. Maybe not to them directly, but just to their employers or whoever. You know, I think that maybe calling people out individually, and that maybe if enough people call them out individually, then maybe the next time they won't just clear a person for booking when they're obviously having a crisis.
Yeah.
Maybe they won't just write her off as being a crazy Black woman. You know, that they could, you know, far be it from me to talk about her experience in that way, but it's so obvious. The disparity in access to healthcare generally needs to be addressed. But that, yeah, just
I really appreciate your fearlessness in naming who was a part of this, and I think we should be unabashed and unafraid to do that.
Yeah.
Shannon, Rose, could I read just that paragraph that you wrote in this Davis Vanguard piece where you're describing her a little bit?
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick. I know we're running out of time. Tragically, the burden of her mental anguish became too great to bear, and Maya took her own life on April 9th, 2021, her 20th birthday. Maya deserved a better chance in this life. She had no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. She dedicated her life to helping underserved populations. She was an amazing handler to the best dog in the world. She loved gardening, art, astrology, hiking, and music. She always rooted for the underdog and stood up for people in the face of bullying or judgment. She would have been an incredible mother. She could have made a huge impact on this world. Instead, she's now just among countless brown and Black people who've been failed by our systems, failed by the education system, failed by the healthcare system, and failed by the criminal justice system. Mental illness is real. Bias in the healthcare and criminal justice systems is real, even if it's just a college kid's news. Even if it's just a college kid's news publication, you should do better, Davis Vanguard. For the sake of someone else's child, I beg you to do better. And I mean, if there's anything else to add there, please do, Rose. But your willingness to come speak with us, your daughter's story, I think, is just so incredibly important. So thank you so much for coming and sharing with us.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, I extend my gratitude as well. And I just, I think that like your fight and advocacy on behalf of Maya, which also is on behalf of other people who will find themselves in similar situations, is so good, and it's so right. And it shows a strength that you shouldn't have to have as a mom whose daughter is gone. Yeah, so thanks for being with us, and that's the show. Thanks to our listeners, and it's a
How do we
Monday
even do
show.
the sign off if it's just you and me, Shannon? I don't even know how to do it.
I don't know. I don't know. We struggled with this last time.
Why don't we just tell everyone we love them and bye-bye then?
We love you. Bye-bye. Go to voicesrivercity.com.
Perfect. Hey, can I ask, Rose, is there any way, like, do you want folks to be able to find you on social media? Any way to find you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, just Rose Disney. And then my email address can be used, rose.disney@att.net.
Perfect.
This is a good way to reach me.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for record scratching the sign off, Shannon. I just wanted to make sure we gave people a chance to reach out to Rose.
Got it.
I guess that's it.
Where can we find you on the internet, Kempa?
I'm on Twitter at YouKnowKempo, YOUKNOWKEMPA.
I'm Shan N.D. Stevens on The Bird.
And that's that. We'll see you next episode, folks.
Yeah, we will say that.